put yourself on a luxury expedition cruise for a moment. There's this underlying expectation of managed adventure.
Right, the illusion of safety.
Exactly. You're sailing past these towering icebergs. You're out there watching penguins in their natural habitats. Maybe you're even braving the notorious Drake Passage. It feels wild. It feels untamed.
But you always know there's a warm cabin waiting for you.
Yeah, a warm cabin, a hot meal, a highly trained medical crew just inside those steel doors. It's the modern illusion of conquering nature while being perfectly, completely insulated from it.
I mean, we want to experience the extremes of the globe, but we demand a barrier. We like the wilderness to stay firmly on the other side of the glass.
But then nature breaches the hull, and suddenly that thick layer of insulation it's gone.
Which is exactly what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, right now. As we speak, in May of 2026, there is a very real, incredibly terrifying crisis unfolding off the coast of Africa. A Dutch luxury expedition ship, the MV Hondius, is completely stranded in the ocean.
It's a massive vessel just sitting there.
They are dealing with a deadly viral outbreak on board. Ports are outright refusing them entry, and international health organizations are just scrambling to manage an entirely unprecedented situation.
It's a scenario that tests the absolute limits of our global health infrastructure. I mean, to really understand the panic happening at the macro level, the closed borders, the emergency flights, the diplomatic standoffs, we have to look at the microscopic mechanics.
The virus itself.
Exactly. The biology here is the actual engine driving the fear.
So that is our mission for today's deep dive. We are going to unpack a whole stack of sources surrounding this real-time event. We're combining breaking news reports with deep virology research to give you a really comprehensive understanding of what this virus actually is.
And how it got on the ship.
Right. How on earth it got onto a luxury icebreaker and the massive international standoff it's triggered. We're going to figure out how a microscopic pathogen brought a massive steel ship to a total standstill.
Well, it all starts with a group of viruses that are practically ancient. I mean, they've been evolving silently right alongside their natural hosts for millions of years.
So before we can understand the nightmare on the MV Hondius, we need to understand the biological profile of this killer. We're talking about orthohantavirus, or, as it's more commonly known, hantavirus.
Yeah, hantavirus.
And normally, this is not a pathogen that stalks the high seas. Hantaviruses are naturally found in rodents like mice, rats, voles.
And what's wild is that in these rodents, the virus causes a persistent but completely asymptomatic infection.
So they don't get sick at all?
Not at all. The reservoir host is fine. The mice are running around totally healthy, living their best lives. But they are shedding this virus everywhere.
Through their excretions, right?
Yes, through their feces, their urine, and their saliva. And when those excretions dry out in the environment, the virus particles become aerosolized. They literally get suspended in the dust.
So a human comes along, maybe sweeping out a dusty shed or working in a field.
Or hiking through dense brush. They kick up that invisible dust, and they simply breathe it in.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the survival rate of this virus outside the body is crazy. The research shows it can survive for 10 days at regular room temperature.
Yeah, 10 days just sitting there.
And if it's colder, like down near freezing, it can survive for over 18 days just waiting in the environment. And when a human does breathe it in, the results are devastating. Our sources actually detail two main diseases caused by these viruses, depending entirely on where you are in the world.
Right. Geography completely dictates the disease profile here. So in Africa, Asia, and Europe, you find the old world hantaviruses.
Which cause what exactly?
They typically cause hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome. Basically, it attacks the kidneys, causing severe swelling, internal hemorrhaging, and eventually renal failure.
Oh, wow. And the mortality rate?
It could reach up to 15% depending on the specific strain.
Okay, but then you have the New World hantaviruses. These cause hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, or HPS, and this is where the numbers get genuinely terrifying.
The mortality rate jumps significantly.
Yeah, the case fatality rate for HPS is an astounding 30 to 60%. It attacks the lungs and the heart. The sources say the initial symptoms feel just like a standard flu, fever, muscle ache.
But it rapidly progresses.
Yeah.
It moves to a cardiopulmonary phase, where the lungs literally fill with fluid.
Which leads to sudden respiratory failure and cardiogenic shock.
It is a swift and brutal disease progression. I mean, to understand why it's so lethal, you have to look at what the virus is actually doing to our cells. It primarily targets the vascular endothelial cells.
Those are the cells lining the blood vessels, right?
Exactly, the inside of your blood vessels.
Okay, I want to visualize this thing. If I'm looking at this virus under a microscope, what makes it such an efficient killer once it gets into the bloodstream?
Well, under a microscope, you'd see this spherical particle, and its genome is segmented into 3 distinct parts. You can think of them as 3 separate pieces of an instruction manual.
Okay, 3 pieces.
Right. And the crucial part is the segment that encodes 2 spike glycoproteins on the surface of the virus. These spikes, they form this symmetrical lattice over the particle, and they are highly, highly specialized.
What are they looking for?
They're looking for a very specific protein on human cells called an integrin, which is basically what helps our blood vessels stick together and maintain their structure.
So the virus is looking for a very specific doorway into our cells. It's a lock and key mechanism.
Exactly.
And when the virus picks that lock, it gains entry, but it also disrupts the glue holding the blood vessels together. That is why the blood vessels start to leak. The virus fundamentally compromises the plumbing.
That is the perfect way to look at it. Once those spikes attach and the virus is pulled inside, it hijacks the cell's machinery to replicate itself.
And then what? It bursts out.
The New World hantaviruses actually assemble near the cell membrane and just bud right off the surface, flooding into the bloodstream to infect the next cell. This causes massive systemic vascular leakage.
And in the lungs, that leakage means blood plasma pours into the air sacs.
Yes. The patient essentially drowns from the inside.
God, that's horrifying. So we have an environmental virus that needs dusty barns, rural fields, or rodent nests to infect people.
Right.
But now we have it sitting on a sterile luxury cruise ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. That makes zero biological sense. There are no dusty barns on the MV Hondius.
No, definitely not.
The natural environmental overlap simply does not exist unless the virus on the ship isn't behaving like a normal hantavirus.
What's fascinating here is that anomaly points to something much more alarming happening on board. On May 6, authorities officially confirmed that the ship is dealing with a very specific strain, the Andes virus.
And the Andes strain is normally found in South America.
Right. But the thing that makes this a global emergency is its unique behavioral profile. The Andes strain is the only hantavirus known to undergo human-to-human transmission.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because other hantaviruses hit a dead end in humans. Like, you can't catch SIN number virus from a coughing patient in a hospital bed.
No, you can't.
But the Andes strain can be passed directly from person to person.
We have to look at why it can do that when the others can't. The virology research suggests the Andes strain replicates much more efficiently in the salivary glands and higher up in the upper respiratory tract of humans compared to other strains.
Ah, so it's concentrated right where it can get out.
Exactly. Because it concentrates in those areas, it can be shed through human saliva and airborne droplets from just coughing, talking, or sneezing.
Wait, hold on. Something isn't adding up for me here. You just said it spreads person to person through droplets, but the research notes we looked at explicitly flagged this kind of transmission as extremely rare.
What usually is.
Right. The systemic reviews mention it usually requires highly intimate contact like sexual partners or a family sharing a very tiny confined space over a long period. So how on earth is it jumping between 150 different people across an entire luxury ship to the point of a mass outbreak? I mean, as of May 6, we're looking at 5 confirmed cases, 3 suspected cases, and 3 deaths.
Well, you have to consider the concept of viral load and the unique pressure cooker environment of a modern cruise ship. Even an expedition vessel like the Hondius is essentially a sealed floating building.
Right.
You have 150 people sharing dining halls, narrow corridors, lounges, and most importantly, an enclosed recirculating HVAC system.
The ventilation.
The ventilation. When a virus that sheds via airborne droplets is introduced into a close quarters maritime environment, the rules of rare transmission completely change.
Because they're breathing the same air over and over.
Exactly. In a normal setting, you might walk past an infected person and get a tiny, inconsequential exposure. But on a ship, the continuous recirculation of air turns that rare, intimate contact into inevitable, prolonged mass exposure. The proximity is forced, continuous, and inescapable.
Just put yourself on that ship right now as a passenger. You were told a highly lethal virus with a 30 to 60% mortality rate is actively spreading.
It would be terrifying.
You're ordered to stay in your cabin, limit contact. The crew is frantically distributing hand sanitizer. But the air you are breathing is shared by everyone on your deck. You can't leave the building. The psychological tension would be absolutely suffocating.
The timeline of this tragedy really illustrates how that tension has escalated, too. I mean, the ship left Argentina on April 1st. Just 10 days into the voyage, On April 11, a Dutch man died on board.
And for almost 2 weeks, his body remained on the ship as they sailed across the Atlantic. They didn't reach the British overseas territory of St. Helena until April 24.
Right, that's when his body was finally removed.
Yeah, and his wife, who had been traveling with him, she disembarked there too. This poor woman takes a commercial flight from St. Helena to Johannesburg, South Africa. Then, on April 26, she boards a connecting flight to Amsterdam, but she is removed from the plane before takeoff because her medical state is visibly deteriorating.
And she died in a hospital that exact same day.
The exact same day. It's so fast.
And the chain of infection didn't stop there. The very next day, April 27, a British passenger, who we now know was the ship's own doctor, had to be airlifted from Ascension Island to Johannesburg in critical condition.
And then on May 2, a German woman died on board the ship.
It's just cascading.
It really is. It is rippling out into the global travel network. Just recently, a stewardess who worked on the April 26 flight from Johannesburg to Amsterdam, the flight the Dutch woman was supposed to be on, was hospitalized in the Netherlands with suspected symptoms.
So she had been in contact with the deceased German passenger at some point during the travel chaos.
Yes, it is actively moving through the ship and leaking out into the international aviation system.
Which naturally triggers a massive, frantic epidemiological investigation. Public health officials had to immediately answer a critical question. How did an environmental virus from South America breach the hull of a departing ship in the first place?
Right. To contain an outbreak, you have to find patient 0. The epidemiological detective work here is fascinating. So the MV Hondius departed from Ushuaia, Argentina, which is the southernmost city in the world, on April 1st. They were scheduled for a 24-day Atlantic odyssey, crossing the Southern Ocean to St. Helena.
Right.
The Argentine Health Ministries and the Malbrand Institute teamed up to trace the exact movements of the index cases, the Dutch couple who first showed symptoms.
And their investigation revealed a sprawling 4-month road trip. From November 2025 all the way to April 2026, this couple traveled across Chile, Uruguay, and Argentina.
So they were covering a lot of ground.
A lot of ground. And the leading hypothesis from the investigators is that the couple contracted the virus while they were out birdwatching.
Wow, birdwatching.
Yeah, they were trekking through the exact rural habitats where the rodent carriers live, likely kicking up and inhaling that aerosolized dust we talked about earlier.
But they were completely healthy when they boarded the ship on April 1st. The Argentine authorities noted that no passengers showed any symptoms at the time of departure. So everyone boards, they unpack, they pop the champagne, totally unaware.
Completely oblivious.
The virus is like a microscopic stowaway. It packs its bags, hides in the cellular cargo hold, and just waits.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the virus's biology, that delay makes perfect sense. Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome has a notoriously long and highly variable incubation period.
How long are we talking?
It can range anywhere from 1 to 8 weeks after exposure, before the first flu-like symptoms even appear.
1 to 8 weeks. That is a massive window.
It is. The couple only returned to Argentina from their rural trip in Uruguay 4 days before the ship sailed. This perfectly explains the timeline. They boarded during the early incubation phase, looking and feeling entirely healthy.
Meanwhile, the virus was slowly replicating, picking those cellular locks.
Exactly. But it hadn't triggered the systemic vascular leakage yet. It didn't strike until April 11, 10 days into the voyage.
So the medical mystery of how it got on board is solved. But the human crisis is peaking right now. It has evolved into a massive, tense geopolitical standoff.
The ship is essentially a floating crisis.
Right. On May 3, the MV Hondius docked in Praia, the capital of Cape Verde. The Cape Verdean government tried to help. They set up isolation zones. They sent medical supplies to the port. But we have to look at the reality of the medical demands here.
It's just too much for them.
Yeah, this is a virus causing complex respiratory failure, requiring intensive care and ventilators. Cape Verde simply lacks the vast medical infrastructure required to handle a mass evacuation and critical care operation of that scale.
They recognize their limitations. So the ship's operator made the logical logistical decision to pull anchor and divert north to Tenerife in the Canary Islands.
Because it's Spanish territory.
Right, and it had the advanced European medical facilities necessary to handle a sudden influx of critical HPS patients.
But they hit a brick wall. Fernando Clavijo, the regional president of the Canary Islands, outright refused them entry. He stated publicly that he cannot allow the Hondius to enter the Canaries.
You really have to look at both sides of this impossible situation.
Definitely. And just to be clear, for you listening, we are not taking sides here. We are just objectively reporting what the sources are laying out because this is highly charged. But President Clevio is citing the safety of the islanders. The local population is incredibly fearful.
And the sources point out that the trauma of the COVID-19 pandemic is still very fresh there.
Exactly. They live on an island. An outbreak of a highly lethal, human-transmissible virus is an existential threat to them.
Island populations are uniquely vulnerable to imported pathogens. Once a virus with human-to-human transmission takes root in an isolated geography, containing it becomes exponentially more difficult.
But on the other hand, the World Health Organization is firing back with a very different perspective. The WHO issued a statement declaring that Spain has a moral and legal obligation to assist these stranded people under international maritime and health laws.
Which makes sense from a global health governance standpoint.
Furthermore, they pointed out that there are several Spanish citizens actively trapped on board the ship. So what does this all mean? You have a terrified local population demanding their borders stay closed to protect their own lives, and international law demanding they open them to save the lives of the passengers.
It is a stark ethical dilemma playing out in real time.
Yeah, it is.
This raises an important question about the extreme fragility of our global health infrastructure. We like to think that with modern medicine, early warning systems, and international protocols, we are fully prepared for biological threats.
Right, are we?
Well, this scenario proves that a single luxury ship carrying just 150 people and a rare pathogen can completely overwhelm local governments and force agonizing, highly political border closures. It shows how quickly the entire system fractures under pressure.
And while this political standoff is happening at the macro level, desperate, high-wire medical evacuations are taking place in the background. They are using specialized air ambulances to pull the most critical patients off the ship and fly them to the Netherlands and Switzerland.
Like the ship's doctor.
Exactly. Remember the ship's doctor who was evacuated? Well, in a terrifying twist, these flights haven't been smooth. On May 6, an air ambulance carrying a Dutch national was flying toward the Netherlands when it experienced a life support system failure midair.
Oh, that's a nightmare. A critical electrical failure on a plane carrying a patient who likely requires intense, continuous respiratory support.
Up in the air.
Right. And given the vascular leakage in the lungs caused by HPS, every second without that support is a literal fight against drowning in one's own plasma.
They actually had to perform an emergency diversion to Gran Canaria just to wait for a replacement aircraft. The sheer panic of that moment at 30,000 feet is unimaginable.
Absolutely terrifying.
And as of May 6, despite the firm refusal from the Spanish authorities, the MV Hondias has pulled its anchor again. It left Cape Verde and is currently sailing directly toward the Canary Islands.
They're forcing the issue.
They are. But before they left, 3 medical professionals, including 2 epidemiologists, boarded the ship. They are sailing directly into the crisis zone to investigate the exact scope of the spread before the ship reaches European waters.
It is a high-stakes race against time.
Really?
Those epidemiologists need to map the entire transmission network within the ship's microenvironment. They have to understand exactly how the virus is moving through the ventilation and the passenger interactions before the vessel arrives at the port in Tenerife.
Taking a step back, look at the incredible, terrifying journey we've tracked today. We started in the microscopic world. A virus, perfectly evolved to survive quietly in the dust of rodent habitats, with a segmented genome and specialized spike proteins picking the locks of our blood vessels.
An ancient biological mechanism.
Yeah. And then we traced how one specific mutation, the Andes strain, which is capable of replicating in human salivary glands, made the leap into a host during a quiet birdwatching trip. From there, a long biological incubation period turned a healthy traveler into a microscopic stowaway, bringing this pathogen onto a sealed luxury cruise ship.
And now, recirculated air has escalated it into a mass human-to-human transmission event.
Right, causing an international standoff playing out in the Atlantic Ocean right now, complete with closed ports, mid-air emergencies, and profound debates over borders.
It emphasizes how deeply interconnected our world really is. I mean, the boundaries we imagine exist between a rural field in South America and a pristine luxury suite on a Dutch expedition ship, those boundaries are an absolute illusion.
They don't exist.
Not at all. Our global travel networks are so relentlessly efficient that an ancient rodent-borne virus can become an international maritime crisis in a matter of weeks.
It feels almost like a movie plot. but it is a very stark reminder of our relationship with the natural environment. You go out looking for an adventure, you want to conquer the wild, and sometimes you bring the wilderness back with you in ways you never intended.
There is one final, lingering thought from the virology data that is perhaps the most chilling aspect of all this.
Oh, what's that?
We discussed earlier how hantaviruses have a segmented genome, those 3 separate pieces of RNA instruction manuals. Well, because of this modular structure, they are highly capable of something called genetic recombination and reassortment.
What does that mean, practically?
It means if 2 different strains of a hantavirus infect the same host at the exact same time, they can actually swap their genetic segments to create an entirely new hybrid virus.
Wait, swap segments, like building blocks?
Exactly.
Okay.
So consider this scenario. If the MV Hondius does force its way into a major European port city, and this highly transmissible Andes strain somehow makes landfall and mixes with a local old world virus residing in the city's rat population.
Oh, no.
Could it reassort? Could we see the birth of a hybrid virus that combines the easy human-to-human droplet transmission of the Andes strain with the entirely different kidney-destroying pathology of an old world hantavirus?
Wow.
It is a chilling, evolutionary possibility that public health officials are undoubtedly sweating over as they watch that ship approach.
The idea that the virus isn't just spreading, but could actively upgrade itself, like swapping out Lego pieces if it reaches the wrong port, that is a genuinely terrifying thought to leave on.
Well, on that sobering note, we want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, whether you're listening on your commute or at home. We hope we've helped make sense of this incredibly complex, unfolding crisis. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll catch you on the next one.
So when you picture global security, you probably imagine, the United Nations' iconic blue helmets rolling into a conflict zone.
Right, yeah. That classic image.
Exactly. And it feels like this massive, perfectly engineered system. Like you assume there's this meticulously crafted master plan for it, buried deep in the original UN Charter, detailing exactly how the international community puts out its biggest fire.
Oh, totally. You would think so.
But the wild thing is there isn't. UN peacekeeping was never in the original blueprint at all.
No, not even close.
It was essentially a desperate last-minute improvisation. So today, we are doing a deep dive into how the world actually manages its worst crises. We're looking closely at the history, the logistics, and the surprising data on whether this multi-billion-dollar effort actually works.
Yeah, and we also have to look at some of its most catastrophic failures, too.
Right, absolutely. Our mission here is to give you a clear shortcut to understanding this incredibly complex machine.
And, the origin story really sets the stage for everything that follows.
I mean, it's fascinating.
It really is. Because if you look at what the framers of the UN Charter originally envisioned back in 1945, they wanted a really robust collective security system.
Okay, so what did that look like?
Well, the plan was for the UN Security Council to have its own standing armed forces.
Wait, like an actual UN army?
Exactly. They even created a military staff committee to coordinate it. So, if a threat emerged anywhere, the UN could respond with direct unified military action.
But I mean, the ink was barely dry on that charter before the Cold War started.
Right. The gridlock was just total. Disagreements between the 2 superpowers completely paralyzed the Security Council.
So nobody could agree on anything.
Basically, yeah. That original collective security plan, the Standing Army, it simply never materialized. But the UN was still left facing these major global crises that it desperately wanted to manage.
But they had literally no tools to do it.
None. So peacekeeping had to be invented out of sheer necessity. It was just a creative workaround.
And what really struck me in the research wasn't just that it was improvised, but that this specific improvisation completely dictates the rigid rules peacekeepers have to operate under today.
Oh, absolutely.
It leads to this brilliant concept from the second UN Secretary General, Dag Hammarskjöld. He categorized peacekeeping as a, quote, Chapter 6.5 activity.
Which is such an interesting phrase.
Mm-hmm.
And to appreciate the cleverness of that, you have to look at the structure of the UN Charter itself.
Right. Let's unpack that.
So Chapter 6 deals strictly with the peaceful settlement of disputes.
Things like mediation and negotiation, right?
Yeah, arbitration, that sort of thing. It relies entirely on talking.
Mm-hmm.
But then Chapter 7, on the other hand, authorizes coercive military force to restore peace.
Like actual warfare authorized by the international community.
Precisely.
So Hammarskjöld realizes these new ad hoc missions don't fit into either category.
Right. They aren't just talking, but they aren't invading either.
Exactly. They're wedged right in the middle, chapter 6.5. It kind of reminds me of a board game rule book. Like, you're halfway through a tense game, people are getting mad, and you realize you have to invent a brand new rule just to keep the board from being flipped over.
That is a perfect analogy. And because it's essentially an invented category, it relies on 3 very specific, very delicate, golden rules to justify its existence.
Okay, so what are the 3 rules?
First, the consent of the conflicting parties. Second, impartiality. And third, the non-use of force, except in self-defense and defense of the mandate.
Those rules form the entire foundation, right?
Completely. Take consent, for instance. If a UN force deploys into a sovereign nation without the permission of the warring parties, they cross the line from peacekeepers to an invading army.
Right. They risk becoming an active participant in the conflict.
Exactly.
And then the second rule, impartiality. That seems to cause a lot of confusion even today. People often conflate impartiality with strict neutrality.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
But the sources make a very clear distinction between the two.
And it's a vital distinction.
It really is. Neutrality essentially means inaction. You observe, you say nothing, and you do nothing, regardless of what happens on the ground.
Just totally passive.
Right. But impartiality is entirely different. It means implementing your mandate without favor or prejudice.
So how does that look in practice?
Well, think of impartiality less like a neutral observer standing on the sidelines and more like a judge enforcing a complex contract.
Oh, that makes sense.
If one party violates the terms of the peace agreement, the peacekeeping operation can penalize those infractions.
So the judge isn't showing bias. They're simply protecting the rules of the agreement based on the evidence, not based on picking a favorite side.
Exactly. You penalize the action, not the actor.
Okay, then we have the third rule, which is the non-use of force, except in self-defense or defense of the mandate.
Yeah, and this is the tricky one.
Definitely. This seems to be where the entire system experiences the most friction. Because as global warfare evolved, sticking to those 3 strict boundaries became nearly impossible.
Yeah, the evolution of those boundaries is usually divided in the literature into 3 distinct generations.
Let's go through those.
So the first generation is what we call traditional peacekeeping, which ran from about 1948 to 1988.
During the Cold War.
Right. It began with the UN Truce Supervision Organization in the Middle East. And remarkably, that mission is still active today.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and these initial deployments were incredibly small and largely consisted of unarmed military observers.
Wait, unarmed?
Entirely unarmed. They were literally just watching to see if anyone broke a ceasefire.
Just taking notes.
Pretty much. But the major shift in this traditional era happened during the 1956 Suez Crisis.
Oh, right. Because France and the UK actually vetoed Security Council action against their own military intervention in Egypt, right?
Exactly. The Security Council was completely deadlocked by its own members.
So the General Assembly utilized a special procedure to step in, and a Canadian official named Lester B. Pearson proposed a brand new concept.
Yeah, and it was a game changer.
Instead of just sending unarmed observers to take notes, he suggested deploying an actual armed buffer force.
Right. Soldiers placed physically between the opposing armies to separate them.
And that concept actually won Pearson a Nobel Peace Prize.
It did, because it established the core template for the first few decades of peacekeeping.
Right. These relatively small, lightly armed missions staffed primarily by soldiers from non-aligned states.
Yeah, acting purely as physical buffers with the total consent of the host nation.
But you know, the world didn't stay stuck in the Cold War paradigm forever.
No, it didn't. Once the Berlin Wall fell, the geopolitical landscape fractured.
Suddenly, the Security Council wasn't deadlocked by superpower vetoes anymore.
Right, but the nature of conflict shifted too. It moved from wars between nations to these incredibly messy internal civil wars.
Which triggers the second generation, right? From roughly 1988 to 1999, the sources called this multidimensional peacekeeping.
Yes, and the mandates during this multidimensional era expanded exponentially. The UN was no longer just monitoring a line in the sand.
They were doing a lot more.
Oh, yeah. Peacekeepers were being asked to rebuild entire societies from the ground up.
I mean, in Cambodia, for example, the UN essentially took over the transitional administration of a whole country.
Right. Peacekeepers were tasked with organizing and running national elections in a nation that was still deeply scarred by the Khmer Rouge.
And in El Salvador, they were monitoring human rights abuses and completely reforming the police.
Or in Mozambique, where they were actively disarming tens of thousands of combatants.
Just the logistical nightmare of trying to register voters or, collect weapons in a post-conflict zone with essentially a Chapter 6.5 mandate. It's staggering.
It really is.
But then we reach the third generation, running from 1999 to the present day. And the sources label this robust peacekeeping.
Yes, robust.
And this is where I find the internal logic of the UN really starts to bend.
How so?
Well, robust peacekeeping is characterized by explicit mandates to protect civilians under imminent threat of physical violence, frequently utilizing Chapter 7 force.
Right. The shift to using force to protect civilians changes the entire character of a deployment.
So let's look at the UN Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or MONUSCO, in 2013.
Very prime example.
The Security Council authorized a specialized force intervention brigade to carry out targeted offensive operations to, quote, neutralize and disarm local armed groups.
They did.
I have to ask, how does authorizing a military force to go on the offensive and neutralize a militia not completely obliterate that original golden rule of the non-use of force?
I mean, it absolutely blurs the line, and that tension is central to modern peace-building debates right now.
It seems completely contradictory.
It does. But to understand the mechanism behind that shift, you really have to look at the institutional trauma the UN suffered in the 1990s.
Right, the failures.
Terrible failures. In 1994, peacekeepers in Rwanda had a restrictive traditional mandate, and they lacked the troop strength to intervene.
And the result was horrific.
The result was a genocide where over 800,000 people were murdered, while UN forces were literally physically present but unable to act.
God, that's just awful.
And then, a year later in Bosnia, the Srebrenica massacre occurred in a UN-designated safe area.
Right.
A peacekeeping battalion was physically there, but they were lightly armed and structurally incapable of stopping the slaughter of thousands of civilians.
So the UN commissioned major internal reviews after those catastrophes, right?
They did. Secretary General Kofi Annan commissioned a comprehensive internal assessment, widely known as the Brahimi Report.
And what did that find?
The findings were stark. The report basically concluded that adhering rigidly to the old principles of impartiality and the non-use of force in the face of mass atrocities was getting people killed.
So they had to adapt.
Yes. It recommended far more robust rules of engagement. So while sending a brigade to neutralize a militia in the Congo inherently strains relationships with host governments.
Because you're basically shooting at their citizens.
Exactly. It pushes the UN closer to peace enforcement rather than peacekeeping. But the ethical and operational justification is that the protection of civilian life must take precedence over rigid bureaucratic rules.
Which makes sense ethically, but it brings up a massive logistical question.
Okay, what's that?
If you have these modern mandates that require heavily armed troops to take offensive action, disarm militias, and protect millions of civilians across a country as vast as the Congo, where are these troops actually coming from?
Yeah.
You would assume the UN has a massive military base somewhere with tens of thousands of soldiers ready to deploy at a moment's notice, but they don't. The UN has zero standing army.
Zero. The entire system relies on voluntary contributions.
Which is wild to think about.
For every single mission, the UN has to ask member states to lend their military personnel.
There is this incredibly revealing quote in our sources from Romeo Dallaire. He was the force commander during the Rwandan genocide.
Yes, his insights are profound.
He describes the UN as a pull system, which is terrifying when you understand the mechanics of it.
Explain the pull concept.
So, in a traditional national military, if a commander deploys troops to the field, the system uses a push logic. The logistics command automatically anticipates the need and pushes food, water, ammunition, and medical supplies to the front lines.
Right, the support infrastructure is just built into the deployment.
Exactly. But Dallaire explained that under the UN's pull system, a commander on the ground has to manually request every single thing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. As a crisis is escalating around you, you have to file paperwork requesting rations or armored vehicles or fuel, and then you just wait.
That sounds agonizing.
You wait while a committee in New York analyzes the request, negotiates with member states to see who is willing to provide it, and then arranges the transport.
So slow.
He noted that in this system, common sense simply doesn't apply. I kept picturing it like trying to organize an emergency neighborhood potluck to put out a house fire. Yeah, like the house is actively burning down and you are standing on the lawn waiting to see who volunteers to bring the hose, who is willing to supply the water, and who is just standing across the street writing a check.
That is a dark but very accurate analogy. And the potluck analogy really highlights the extreme vulnerability of an ad hoc supply chain in a war zone.
Definitely.
And when you look closely at who is providing the hose versus who is writing the check, you see a profound global divide in how peacekeeping is sustained.
Oh, totally. The demographics and the financial burdens are completely segregated.
Completely. The financial cost is overwhelmingly borne by wealthy, industrialized nations.
Like who?
Well, the United States contributes roughly 27% of the entire multi-billion-dollar peacekeeping budget. China covers about 19%, and Japan contributes roughly 8%.
That's a huge chunk.
Yeah. If you combine the contributions of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, they fund almost 60% of all operations.
But those countries are rarely the ones putting boots on the ground.
Rarely, yes. The human capital, the soldiers actually patrolling these volatile areas, comes overwhelmingly from developing nations.
Right. Looking at the data provided, Nepal stands as the largest contributor of troops, deploying thousands of personnel.
Yeah, Nepal, Rwanda, Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan consistently top the list.
And nearly half of all UN personnel are contributed by African nations.
Right. And the physical toll is devastating. Over 4,400 peacekeepers have died since the system was created in 1948.
4,400, wow.
Nations like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nigeria, and Ghana have absorbed the highest casualty rates.
So we have this slow-to-assemble, incredibly bureaucratic force funded largely by the global north, staffed predominantly by the global south, operating under improvised rules, and deployed into the most dangerous places on Earth.
It's a miracle it functions at all.
Right. The fundamental question for anyone listening to this has to be, does this chaotic system actually work?
Well, if we isolate the macro-level academic data, the results are actually deeply counterintuitive.
Okay, in what way?
When researchers crunch the numbers across decades of post-conflict data, a clear and consistent pattern emerges. Peacekeeping operations substantially extend the duration of peace.
Really?
Yeah. One major statistical analysis estimates that a substantial expansion of peacekeeping globally would reduce ongoing armed conflict by roughly 2/3.
Wait, a 2/3 reduction in ongoing conflict?
2/3.
How is that even possible given the structural nightmares we just described?
It works primarily through the mechanism of a credible buffer.
Like Pearson's idea back in the 50s.
Exactly. Even if the UN force doesn't have overwhelming firepower, their sheer presence alters the calculus of the warring parties.
So just being there is enough?
Largely, yes. Larger deployments, specifically armed military units rather than unarmed observers, dramatically reduce civilian casualties.
Oh, wow.
Combatants are far more likely to come to the negotiating table and stick to an agreement if they know an international force is physically present to monitor infractions and reduce the risk of a surprise attack.
That makes sense.
So, statistically speaking, the sheer presence of the blue helmets saves lives and prevents civil wars from reigniting.
But as impartial guides to this material, we cannot only look at the macro-level spreadsheet.
No, we absolutely can.
We have to address the localized failures and the active harms detailed extensively in our sources.
And there are many.
We already discussed the operational failures where peacekeepers couldn't stop massacres like Rwanda and Srebrenica, but there are also profound systemic harms inflicted by the missions themselves.
Yes. The sources document severe, systemic issues of sexual exploitation and abuse committed by peacekeepers across multiple deployments.
It's awful to read about.
It is. Investigations have revealed widespread abuses in places like Bosnia, Cambodia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Haiti, Liberia, and the Central African Republic.
Doesn't the UN have oversight for this?
Well, the UN has established a conduct and discipline unit to track these allegations. But independent reviews consistently note that the reliance on troop-contributing countries to prosecute their own soldiers leads to a severe lack of accountability and substantial underreporting.
Because the UN can't actually court-martial them.
Right. Exactly. The host nations have to do it, and often they don't.
And then there is the devastating operational failure of the Haiti cholera outbreak in the 2010s.
Oh, a massive tragedy.
This is a crucial example of a mission actively introducing a deadly threat to a vulnerable population.
Yes.
Following a massive earthquake, Nepalese peacekeepers were deployed to a base near the Artibonite River. And the systemic failure wasn't just a matter of generally, poor sanitation.
It was much worse.
The waste management infrastructure at the UN base was deeply flawed, allowing untreated sewage to leak directly into the river system, which local communities relied upon for drinking and bathing.
And cholera had not been recorded in Haiti prior to this deployment.
Right.
The resulting outbreak infected over 800,000 people and killed roughly 10,000.
10,000 people. And what makes the institutional response so difficult to process is that, initially, the UN invoked legal immunity under its charter to dismiss lawsuits from the victims' families.
Yeah, they fought it in court. It took years before Secretary General formally apologized for the UN's role in the outbreak.
So how do you reconcile these two realities? How do you balance the statistical truth that having a UN presence globally reduces conflict by 2/3 with the micro-level reality that these missions can introduce disease, exploitation, and systemic harm to the exact communities they are mandated to protect?
That tension is actually driving a major debate in current peacebuilding scholarship right now. It's often referred to as the local turn.
Okay, the local turn, what does that mean?
Researchers are questioning the very mechanisms of how these top-down missions operate. Think about how a massive UN bureaucracy defines success.
Right, like what metrics they use.
Exactly. A mission commander headquartered in New York or a capital city might look at a spreadsheet of conflict metrics, see that a peace treaty was signed by two rival warlords, and declare the mission a statistical success.
Because the large-scale violence stopped on paper?
Precisely. But the local turn scholarship points out that the local population knows those same warlords are now formally entrenched in power and still extorting their villages.
Ah, so it's peace for the elites, but not the citizens.
Exactly. The top-down UN structure is designed to interface with national elites and armed actors, often completely bypassing community leaders, women's groups, and local civil society.
Which is a huge blind spot.
It is. If a mission secures an elite political settlement but alienates, ignores, or actively harms the local population in the process, the resulting peace is rarely sustainable.
It seems like the entire system is grappling with the fact that you can't engineer peace purely from a headquarters in New York.
No, you really can't.
Let's pull all of these threads together. UN peacekeeping is this multi-billion-dollar experiment in global security that only exists because the original plan for a unified global army collapsed on day one.
Right.
It is an improvised workaround that asks soldiers from the developing world, funded by the developed world, to step between warring factions armed with little more than an international mandate and the promise of impartiality.
That's a great summary.
And it is a deeply flawed system that simultaneously saves countless lives on a macro level while struggling with catastrophic systemic failures on the ground.
And this imperfect system is currently facing what might be its most severe existential threat yet.
What's that?
A crisis of consent.
Really?
Yeah, the very first golden rule we discussed, the consent of the host nation, is eroding rapidly.
Oh, wow.
Over the past few years, tensions between UN missions and host governments have escalated dramatically.
So host countries are actively revoking their permission and telling the UN to pack up and leave.
We saw this prominently in 2023. The multidimensional integrated stabilization mission in Mali, known as MINUTESMA, was forced to close completely at the explicit non-negotiable request of the Malian transitional government.
Just told them to get out.
Yep. And other massive deployments in the Central African Republic and the Democratic Republic of the Congo are facing intense political pressure and repeated demands for accelerated drawdowns.
And it doesn't look like there's a new generation of missions waiting in the wings to replace them, does it?
No, the pipeline is entirely dry. Based on the data in our sources, the UN Security Council has not authorized a single new peacekeeping operation since establishing a justice support mission in Haiti back in 2017.
Wait, not since 2002?
Not a single one. We are currently experiencing the longest gap without a new mission since the Cold War deadlock of the 1980s. The political appetite for massive, multidimensional peacekeeping is just disappearing.
Which leaves us with a critical thought to end on. Think back to that metaphorical board game.
Right, where they had to invent a rule.
Exactly. The players invented Chapter 6.5 to keep the entire board from flipping over. But that improvised rule only works if the players agree to let the referees on the field.
Yeah, that's true.
If host countries continue to revoke their consent, if the pipeline for new deployments remains completely empty, and if those iconic blue helmets are simply no longer invited into the world's most volatile conflict zones, you really have to wonder.
Wonder what?
Who or what is going to step into the void to manage global peace?
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are unpacking a really massive Wikipedia dossier on Tikal.
Yeah, one of the most powerful urban centers of the ancient Maya civilization.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to basically figure out how a sprawling city with absolutely no natural water source, by the way, managed to support millions of people.
Right, and how it survived some pretty brutal foreign invasion.
Yeah, and then how it ultimately engineered its own tragic, toxic doom.
It's quite the story.
It really is. And to set the stage for you all listening, we have to look at this incredible discovery from 2018 in the Guatemalan rainforest. It completely shattered our understanding of this entire civilization.
Oh, it was a massive paradigm shift because, for centuries, our perspective on Tikal was pretty much limited to what archaeologists could, physically uncover with machetes.
Just hacking through the jungle.
Right. We saw these breathtaking stone temples sticking up out of the canopy, and we just assumed those visible monuments marked the boundaries of the city.
Like it was just this isolated ceremonial center.
Exactly. We thought, well, this is it. This is the whole site.
But then researchers deployed LiDAR technology.
Which is just phenomenal.
Yeah, they mount these advanced lasers on aircraft and fire, like billions of pulses down through the dense jungle canopy. It digitally strips away the trees to reveal the bare ground underneath.
It's honestly like putting the entire Guatemalan rainforest through a medical X-ray machine.
Right. And when they looked at the scans, they didn't just see, a few extra temples.
No, not at all.
They found 60,000 uncharted structures hidden right there in the immediate region.
60,000.
Yeah. Houses, defensive fortifications, raised highways. The data suggests an ancient population of like 7 to 11 million Maya people living in that region.
And that's during the late Classic period, right?
Yeah, roughly between 600 and 900 AD, when the Maya civilization was really at its peak. So we aren't talking about some jungle outpost. We are talking about a full-blown megalopolis.
And that sheer scale introduces this fascinating geographical puzzle. Because Tikal was built on elevated limestone ridges above these swampy lowlands.
Which means?
Which means if you look at the immediate environment, there are no natural rivers flowing through the city.
Wow.
There are no natural lakes, no underground springs to tap into. They were an upland city completely and utterly dependent on collected rainwater.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
Because you don't support millions of people in a wider region and tens of thousands in the density core just by, hoping it rains and putting out a few clay pots.
Right. You need something much bigger.
Building a civilization there required master-level ecological engineering. The city itself had to be this massive machine for catching and keeping water.
And they did that with the quarries, right?
Yeah. So when the Maya quarried the local limestone to build those towering temples, they were left with these massive depressions in the earth.
Giant holes everywhere.
Exactly. And instead of just discarding them or filling them in, they plastered the porous stone to waterproof them. They literally turned their quarries into 10 massive artificial reservoirs.
That is so clever.
They even paved their main plazas with stucco and built them on a slight gradient. The entire city center was designed as a giant funnel.
So whenever it rained, the water would just channel right off the plazas and straight into these holding tanks.
You got it.
Storing the water is a monumental feat of civil engineering, for sure. But keeping it drinkable in a tropical environment, that is the real challenge.
Oh, yeah, because stagnant water in the jungle.
It normally becomes a huge breeding ground for malaria-bearing mosquitoes, parasite-ridden flies, and, deadly algae blooms.
Gross.
Very. So to solve this, the Maya applied a really sophisticated understanding of wetland biosphere ecology. They actively managed the ecosystem within these reservoirs by introducing the dotleaf water lily.
The dotleaf water lily, scientifically known as...
Nymphaea ampla.
Right. And the mechanics of how this plant works are just brilliant.
They really are.
The lily has these bluish undersides that physically block sunlight from penetrating deep into the water, which suppresses the algae growth.
And the lily pads provide shade and habitat for the natural predators of insect pests.
Like dragonflies and fish. So that keeps the mosquito population in check.
Exactly. And the roots actively extract excess nitrogen from the water.
Plus, they serve as a biological pH indicator, which I think is amazing.
It is. These lilies cannot survive in highly acidic water, so the Maya actually lined the bottom of the reservoirs with specific clays to stabilize the pH.
Wow. So as long as the lilies were flowering, the citizens knew the water was chemically balanced and safe to drink.
Yeah, and they took that biological engineering even further. Recent archaeological work at a specific site called the Corriental Reservoir revealed this massive filtration system built right into the intake channel.
A filtration system?
Yeah. Researchers found layers of coarse quartz sand and 2 specific types of zeolite minerals.
Conoptolite and mordanite, right?
Yes. And these minerals are highly porous. They physically trap harmful microbes, heavy metal toxins, and nitrogenous waste as the water flows through them.
So wait. This is exactly like a giant Brita filter.
It is the exact same principle, and literally the exact same materials we use in modern municipal water purification systems today.
That is mind-blowing. And it strikes me that this isn't just a public utility. I mean, if you are the king providing this miraculously pure, life-saving water in an environment that naturally has none.
Oh, that infrastructure is literally the foundation of your political legitimacy.
Right. The person who controls the water controls the empire.
Absolutely. And the Maya made sure no one forgot that connection. Clean water, the flowering water lilies, and political power became completely intertwined in their ideology.
You see it in the art.
Everywhere. Rulers were constantly depicted in iconography alongside water management symbols. They're often wearing these elaborate headdresses adorned with water lilies.
Wow. So they position themselves as, like, the essential intermediaries with the gods who brought the rain.
Exactly. But it created a very potent and honestly extremely fragile political feedback loop. The kings claimed divine credit for the water.
Which is great when it rains.
Right. But it meant that when the system failed, like during the severe prolonged droughts we know hit the region, they absorbed all the blame.
Yeah, because that water system required massive centralized coordination. The people running it became immensely powerful, but it also made them giant targets.
Because if you control Tikal, you control the economic engine of the Maya lowlands.
Exactly. And that vulnerability is exactly why in January of 378 AD, a foreign superpower decided to strike.
The political history of Tikal is incredibly volatile.
It really is. So we have the native king, a man named Chaktok Ek, also known as Great Jaguar Paw.
Great name.
It is. And on January 14th of that year, a foreign general arrives from the west. His name is Siash Kalk.
Which translates to fire is born.
Right. And on the very day fire is born, walks into Tikal, King Great Jaguar Paw he dies.
Yeah. The hieroglyphic records are highly sanitized, but the subtext of that quote-unquote death is pretty clear.
Right. It wasn't a coincidence.
Definitely not. Siash Hak was a general representing this mysterious, powerful figure known as Spear Thrower Owl.
And all the archaeological evidence points to Spear Thrower Owl being the ruler of Teotihuacan.
Which was the massive, dominant metropolis located hundreds of miles away in the distant Valley of Mexico. This was a targeted, decisive military intrusion.
It's less like a traditional military conquest and more like, a hostile corporate takeover.
That's a good way to put it.
Teotihuacan swoops in, liquidates the local CEO, but they don't rule Tikal directly as a colonial outpost.
Right, they want to integrate.
Yeah. Within a year, they install a new king, a young boy named Yaxnu'un Ahin the Thirst. And this boy just happens to be the son of Spear Thrower Owl.
Convenient.
Very. They install a puppet king, but they keep the original company branding. This is a process you call Mayanization, right?
Yeah, Mayanization. The conquerors were pragmatic. They knew they were foreigners in a radically different cultural landscape.
So they couldn't just boss everyone around.
Exactly. To rule effectively and prevent massive revolts, they needed legitimacy in the eyes of the millions of local Maya.
So what did they do?
Well, it's highly likely this new Teotihuacan boy king took a wife from the pre-existing defeated Tikal dynasty.
Ah, marrying into the power.
Yes. And over generations, these foreign rulers absorbed Maya culture. You can really see this blending on their monuments, like the famous Stela 31.
Saw that one.
The king is carved, dressed in traditional Maya royal regalia, but he is flanked by imagery of his father, dressed as a Teotihuacan warrior.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, carrying a shield bearing the face of Tlaloc, which is the central Mexican storm and war god. Tikal essentially absorbed its conquerors.
That is fascinating. But holding on to that blended power wasn't easy, right?
Not at all.
The region was a powder keg of rival city-states. Which brings us to the 6th century and Tikal's long-running rivalry with another Maya superpower, Gallic. Right.
In 562 AD, an alliance between Calakmul and the city of Karakol inflicts a catastrophic defeat on Tikal.
It was devastating.
Tikal loses its dominance entirely, triggering what historians call the Tikal hiatus. For 120 years, the city goes completely dark in the historical record.
A total blackout.
Yeah, they stopped erecting stelae. You know, those massive carved stone slabs they used to record their history and legitimize the king's divine right to rule?
And to really understand the weight of that, you have to imagine living through a 120-year dark age.
That's a long time.
It's 4 or 5 generations of citizens living in a city that is no longer building, no longer conquering, no longer celebrating its rulers in stone.
It's just stagnant.
The central political engine just sputtered. Regional governors likely gained a lot more autonomy, while the commoners continued to farm the surrounding landscape.
It's trying to survive.
Right. The elite rituals that bound the society together were suspended. We even know from an altar monument found at Karakol that a king of Tikal was likely captured and sacrificed during this period.
The humiliation was profound.
Emerging from a century of silence required a massive show of strength then.
Absolutely.
So in 682 AD, a ruler named Joshua Chan Kwawil takes the throne and orchestrates this astonishing resurgence. He defeats Calakmul, captures their nobles, and completely ends the hiatus by launching one of the most ambitious building programs in the Americas.
And he had to project absolute, unshakable authority to do that.
Yeah, he mobilized staggering amounts of labor to build monuments like Temple IV, which stands 70 meters tall. That's about 230 feet.
Huge.
And what is wild is that some of these massive pyramids were constructed in as little as 2 years.
That speed is incredible. The logistics of feeding and organizing the thousands of workers required for that construction is just a testament to the centralized power he reclaimed.
Seriously.
But, you know, the temples themselves were often mortuary pyramids. They were built directly over the tombs of the rulers. And the burial practices beneath these structures reveal a really complex relationship with physical power and the human body.
Right, the archaeological finds in those tombs are honestly haunting.
They are.
Deep in the North Acropolis, excavators found burial 85. This tomb likely belongs to the dynastic founder who died in battle long before the hiatus.
Right.
When his followers buried him, his skeleton was missing its head and its thigh bones.
Gone.
Yeah, his body was wrapped up in textiles, and where his head should have been, they placed a small greenstone mask with shell-inlaid teeth and eyes.
And this isn't an isolated practice either.
Right. Burial 48, the tomb of a later king, contained a skeleton missing its skull, its femurs, and one of its hands.
And he wasn't alone.
No, the king was accompanied by the intact skeletons of 2 adolescents who had been sacrificed.
Yeah. This intense focus on mutilating and restoring the physical body is tied deeply to Maya warfare and ancestor veneration.
Like, why take the bones?
Well, in Mesoamerican warfare, capturing an enemy ruler and removing their head or their long bones was a way to spiritually disarm them. It was the ultimate desecration of their power, a way to erase their identity and permanently conquer their lineage.
But then his own people lovingly restore him. They substitute a jade mask for the missing head, wrapping the incomplete body with incredible care.
Exactly. The restoration demonstrates that the physical remains of the kings were the literal foundation of the city's spiritual life.
Because they still hold power.
Yes. The Maya believed that the ancestors continued to influence the world of the living. The North Acropolis at Tikal was basically a layered cake of royal tombs.
A layered cake?
Yeah. Each new king would construct a new temple directly on top of the older ones. They were physically anchoring their current power to the venerated bones of their ancestors.
Wow. So they built this empire on monumental architecture, on the sacred bones of their ancestors, and on a miraculous water management system.
They did.
But ultimately, Tikal's story ends in a cascading tragedy. The very mechanisms that made them great triggered their downfall.
Yeah, it all unravels.
By the 9th century, during a period known as the Terminal Classic Collapse, Tikal's population was peaking. Millions of people in the region required massive amounts of food.
Naturally.
Which meant clearing vast tracts of the surrounding rainforest for agriculture.
And that deforestation initiated a deadly environmental feedback loop.
How so?
Well, when you clear massive amounts of jungle canopy, you disrupt the local microclimate. Trees actively transpire. They essentially sweat moisture into the air, which gathers and falls back down as local rain.
Oh, I see.
Cut down the trees, and you physically reduce the amount of rainfall. The soil erodes, losing its nutrients, making it harder to grow food for the swelling population.
So they were systematically dismantling the environment that sustained them.
Completely.
But the killing blow was the water. We talked about how carefully they engineered those reservoirs with zeolite filters and water lilies to keep the drinking water pure.
Right, the ancient Brita filters.
Exactly. But recent molecular and geochemical analysis of the sediment at the bottom of Tikal's reservoirs revealed something awful.
Yeah.
In the final years of the city, the water became heavily contaminated with toxic cyanobacteria, phosphate pollution, and lethally high levels of mercury.
Now, the phosphate pollution makes sense. It was a direct result of overpopulation. As the numbers swelled beyond the city's capacity, human waste and food refuse inevitably washed into the reservoirs, feeding those toxic algae blooms.
Just overwhelming the lilies.
Exactly. But the mercury contamination is a profound tragedy because it was entirely a product of their own cultural practices.
Right, because the Maya considered red a sacred color, deeply tied to the rising sun, life force, and human blood.
Yes.
To visually project this sacred power, they painted those magnificent palaces and 70-meter-tall temples a brilliant red using a pigment called cinnabar.
And cinnabar is an ore of mercury.
Exactly. For centuries, heavy tropical rains lashed those sacred buildings, physically washing the mercury-laced pigment directly down the stucco-paved plazas and straight into the city's drinking water.
They literally engineered an incredible system for survival and then inadvertently poisoned it.
Accidental self-poisoning.
Yeah. And as the deforestation exacerbated regional droughts, the water levels in the reservoirs dropped.
So the poison gets more concentrated.
Exactly, concentrating the mercury and the toxic algae.
Yeah.
The water they desperately relied upon became deadly.
It is the ultimate collapse of the social contract.
Yeah.
I mean, the rulers' divine authority, their entire justification for power, was based on acting as intermediaries with the gods to provide clean water.
So when the reservoirs turned into toxic, algae-choked, mercury-filled pools...
The rulers couldn't fix it.
No, they couldn't.
The people lost faith. The centralized authority completely evaporated between 830 and 950 A.D. The final days of the city paint an incredibly eerie picture.
It really does.
By the end of the 9th century, the vast majority of the population had fled. But there were still people there. Squatters moved into the grand royal palaces, building simple thatched huts right in the middle of those ceremonial plazas.
And the archaeological record from this final phase is so striking.
What did they find?
Well, these squatters blocked up doorways in the monumental structures. They left behind domestic trash mixed with instruments used for local ceremonies.
Just living in the ruins.
Yeah, they reused the ancient monuments for their own distinct rituals, completely ignoring the royal history of the site.
Wow.
And the ancestral tombs of the North Acropolis, the very foundations of the king's power, were looted. All reverence for the old rulers and their intricate systems was completely gone.
Just vanished.
By the 10th or 11th century, even those final inhabitants left, and Tikal was completely surrendered back to the rainforest.
You know, it makes you think. Imagine you are living in a modern city today. Think about the infrastructure you rely on daily, without a second thought for you listening right now.
Yeah, it's easy to take for granted.
The clean water coming out of your tap, the electricity powering your home, the complex global supply chains bringing food to your grocery store. We tend to view our technological environment as this permanent shield against nature.
But we aren't immune.
No. Tikal is a stark reminder that no matter how monumental our achievements seem, no matter how clever our engineering, we are always intricately bound to the limits of our environment.
Always.
The Maya built a megalopolis with no water source and sustained millions of people through sheer biological and geological ingenuity, only to trigger a regional collapse when their own expansion outpaced the environment's ability to heal.
It really leaves us with a lingering question to ponder.
What's that?
Well, imagine being one of those final squatters living in a thatched hut among the ruins of the majestic palaces of Tikal. You're surrounded by the towering temples built by your ancestors, monuments to a golden age you barely understand.
Right.
Did those final inhabitants grasp that their society's collapse was a result of their own environmental missteps of deforestation, overpopulation, and poison technology?
Or did they just not know?
Right? Did they simply look up at the polluted, mercury-laced reservoirs and believe the gods had abandoned them? When our own technological fixes eventually fail to insulate us from the natural world, how will we write the story of our own ruin?